This week on the BackTable podcast.
We really haven't made any changes in radiation protection in over 100 years. You know, the lead apron's been around 100 years. Think of all the evolution that we've done in our space in interventional cardiology and the way it was practiced 100 years ago. It doesn't even register from the way we're practicing now with the technologies that we have and the advancements in it. But that just hasn't happened in radiation protection and protecting us as operators and our teams from the risks of the orthopedic risks and also the radiation risks. And so it really, opened my eyes to say this has got to change, and there's got to be a reason why we haven't changed it. It's not rocket science. It is putting a barrier protection with some type of heavy metal between you and the radiation source.
Hello, everybody. This is Hady Lichaa, Interventional Cardiovascular Specialist from Ascension St. Thomas Heart in Murfreesboro in Nashville, Tennessee. I have the pleasure of having Dr. Bob Foster, the Chief Medical Officer of Rampart IC, a radiation safety company. Today, an interventional cardiologist who's going to talk to us about the importance of radiation safety, tips and tricks. Hello, Bob. How are you?
Good, Hady. Thanks for having me, and thanks BackTable for having me.
I'd love to get to know your background, your training, your previous career, and what you're occupying most of your professional time right now.
Fantastic. So, even starting way back, I'm more just a country boy. I was raised in Texas and Alabama and Georgia, and kind of bounced back and forth between Alabama and Texas most of my training career. I went to Baylor University, so I was undergrad in Waco, and then went to UAB for medical school. While I was there, I had a great opportunity to do some research in cardiology under Jerry Pohost, and mostly in cardiac MR and MRI. And then went back out to UT Southwestern in Dallas and did my residency in internal medicine. Survived that. It was a absolute beating, which I'm not sure they do those beatings anymore, but it was a lot of fun. Got to know some fantastic leaders at UT Southwestern. Then came back to UAB and did my fellowship there. Went on staff at UAB because I was at that point now director of cardiac MR at UAB, but really wanted to do intervention. This was a time that you didn't have to go to formal interventional training. It was, right at the time we started doing angioplasty and stents. And so I actually joined a practice in Birmingham with a physician that was willing to train me. So I did 300 or 400 cases with him. And then that was the first year interventional boards came out. So I took interventional boards. Very early on, just within a couple of years of practice, I really started having a passion for peripherals and started very early on doing simple peripheral intervention, renal stents and some iliac work, and then really morphed my whole practice into doing more complex SFA closures, pedal approaches, complex peripheral intervention. And with that, as you know, we're placed in very odd positions, and, we're in the lead for very long hours and long cases. The equipment that we had back then was not nearly as good as we have now for getting across these CTOs and in the legs. And so started having some issues with my back. And that's really what changed the trajectory of my life, my career, that this is such an important field that really has to change.
Absolutely. So obviously we're going to get to the big why of radiation safety. If you could elaborate a little bit more on the orthopedic injuries and the statistics that we have right now about cancer amongst other health issues in interventional cardiologists.
Yeah, I don't know if a lot of your listeners really understood. I certainly didn't understand that it was as big an issue as it is. But the first paper that I found that really came out was a SCAI survey that came out in 2004, which showed about 60% of us were having severe back injuries after about 20 years of practice. I was in my 21st year when I ruptured my second disc and my leg was paralyzed and I couldn't walk, and I was out of the lab for a year and, basically in the clinic for a year. And, it was a really dark, difficult time for me. And in starting to look at why this happened to me when I was, trying to stay in shape, I was doing triathlons, I was doing everything that I could to really stay in shape and still having this issue. So when I was sitting there with my leg paralyzed, it really makes you reflect on, not only are you going to be able to practice, but what's life going to be like going forward. And once you start looking at the data, this survey repeated itself in 2014 to the SCAI members, and there was absolutely no change, that it was still 60% having severe orthopedic injury. And then the most recent survey that just came out, which is 2023, the data is actually a little bit worse. It went up to about 64, 66%. So we haven't made any changes, but we really haven't made any changes in radiation protection in over 100 years. The lead apron's been around 100 years. You think of all the evolution that we've done in our space in interventional cardiology and the way it was practiced 100 years ago. It doesn't even register from the way we're practicing now with the technologies that we have and the advancements in it. But that just hasn't happened in radiation protection and protecting us as operators and our teams from the risks of the orthopedic risks and also the radiation risks. And so it really, opened my eyes to say, this has got to change. And there's got to be a reason why we haven't changed it. It's not rocket science. It is putting a barrier protection with some type of heavy metal between you and the radiation source. And that's what reduces it. And that's what absorbs it and keeps it from coming to you. Now, whether you wear that or whether you put it as a shielding, then, it all works the same. So why not take it off our backs? Why not put it on the ceiling? Why not put it on the floor? And why not make it so that it's not our spines that are supporting that weight? Because we know we're going to have it in there until we evolve to doing these procedures without any radiation, which I think we're a good way away from that.
I'm imagining that a period when you had the health issues and then you're transitioning back to the lab, the courage that it takes to change a culture, to come up with new equipment. Tell us about your story from when you were injured to the time when this became materialized with the Rampart IC.
Yeah, that was probably the hardest thing, is educating people that there is an alternative. And so when I got back in the lab, again, I ran into the same issue everybody else does, that your hospital doesn't want to buy you anything. Even though I was the highest volume operator in our hospital, it still didn't register that they needed to buy me any extra equipment so that I could protect my back and go back in the lab. So I actually physically took my lead apron to my administrator and made her put it on and just said, this is what we're wearing every day. This is why my injury occurred. And she was like, yeah, that's heavy. And, she wanted to give it back. And I was like, no, just wear it all day like I do. And I'll get it back by the evening, this evening. And she was like, no, I can't wear this thing all day. And I said, well, that's what we're dealing with. So I think it kind of opened her eyes to say, yeah, we've got to do something. And so they were, at that time, the only thing on the market that could get me out of lead was zero gravity. And so they did get me a zero gravity. But what I realized is just attaching that to me and moving, it was kind of difficult to move. And that drag, because you're dragging it from a boom from the ceiling, really put a lot more tension on my back. I had struggle hearing people around me for the equipment that they're getting. I had a problem with them hearing me. I tend to mumble behind my mask and probably doing it now. But yeah, so, communication was difficult. It was to drape it for a STEMI was hard. The staff didn't like taking the time to drape it just for me. And it was really just a product that was for one person. And so the thought there was, is there any way that we could develop a barrier that's not on the body, but it's basically taking, as if you will, the zero gravity, opening it up and putting it in front of you in the source. And so that's really where the idea came from. And sitting down with a good friend of mine named Tom Livingston, who's now the CEO of Rampart, I said, there's got to be something that we can do, even if it's to get me back in the lab. I can't continue to go like this. And so, we went to some designing engineers. I had told him that I would fund the project. And so
you
up to a certain level.
You personally funded?
Personally
Wow.
funded it. Yeah. So I funded the project and for a couple of years and then got it all the way to a commercial product. Actually, the first one was actually in my lab. My hospital did actually buy it for me. And the first initial Defender, and it's still in place. It's still in the lab, going strong. But all the hiccups that go along with really starting a company, we had to feel those that now we're ready to go, but we need a sterile drape, and trying to get sterile drapes and all all the regulations that go along. Luckily, it's a class 1 device, which means you don't have to, there's not any FDA approval. It's kind of like the lead apron. You don't have to have FDA approval. You have to go by FDA guidelines, and they, oversee what you do. But because there's no interaction with the patient, you don't have to have, it's class 1, 510K exempt. So it made it a little bit, easier to get it out there. We had done all the testing. It showed that it was better than the lead apron, and so that's when we really started the company. This was about 2018 or so. My back went out in 2014, so it took a couple of years. I was working full time. He was working full time. We were actually on a drive out to see my son, who's in the Air Force. Was at the Air Force Academy at the time, and now is pilot for the Air Force. But we were taking his car out there. My wife, we had kind of put this on the back burner, and she said, whatever happened to that device that you were thinking about inventing? And I said, I don't know. I'm just not an entrepreneur, and it's going to cost a lot. And are we willing to do it? And luckily, she supported me and said, if you think it'll change other people's lives, then I'm all for it. And so I think with that energy and that kind of ability to know that, we were going to have to leverage all of our retirement and everything else to be able to do it, I think it was really her that said, gave me a little bit more boldness to actually do it. Whether it was smart or not, I don't know, but at least it was bold to do it. But anyway, that's where we got the first product out in 2019. You ask about the acceptance, and that's really what the challenge was: is how do you get people to accept when you take off this lead apron? It's a weird feeling, Hady. I mean, you're in there, you don't have anything protecting you. You can't see the radiation, you can't feel it. You're taking our word for it that this thing's protecting you. And so it was really now just getting buy-in, and we had to have a portable system to be able to do that, because going into a lab and saying, we want you to try it, but we got to get up in your ceiling was not really an option. So we really need a portable system up front. And so really the legacy device of Rampart is the Defender, which is the initial portable system that we can roll in and roll out. And later on, we can talk a little bit about some of the newer evolutions of where it's gone, which is really, really exciting to me.
I mean, the great story of where you started and how you changed people's lives. There are thousands of people right now counting on your technology, and not too many people are able to materialize their inventions. So that by itself is a massive undertaking, which you succeeded at. Just out of curiosity, how many years did it take between you inventing it and the patenting system?
Yeah, so the patenting system's a really long system. It's kind of interesting. I've obviously learned a lot about it, but the patent system is, once you kind of draw your patent, you have to do it very early on, even at the conceptual phase. So even at the conceptual phase, you get your patent, you make it as broad and as general as possible, and then submit that. But then you keep it open, so you can, as you more define what you're doing, you can keep that and adding to that existing patent, which I didn't realize you could do. So that's something that we continue to do. We continue to keep the patents open so you can add to them. I think it's kind of interesting, and most people will say that your patent and your IP are really, really valuable to your company, but the patent system I found is not always, what it seems to be. It seems like there's always little niches that people might be able to get around, or, different patent people look at it a different way. So, the bottom line is you want to make sure that you're not, violating someone else's patent, but, and it does ultimately protect you to some degree. But, the bottom line is you've got to make this, whatever your product is, it's got to do its job. It's got to have the data to support it. It's got to not impact workflow, because that's the other thing that we found is if it impacts workflow, it's going to be rejected. And so it can impact workflow. Obviously, with ours, it doesn't really affect patient care. But this is a very serious project, because you are now the radiation protection for people in the room. And as you know, a lot of bad things can happen with radiation exposure.
So let's kind of dive into the system itself. Obviously, it is one of the safest systems out there. Can you tell us a little bit about the radiation that any person can get the closest to the system, and the data that you have so far on physicians who have used it in real life in terms of following up on real world data?
Yeah, that's a great lead in, because I do think that one of the things that we want to be at Rampart and separate us from any competition, we want to be data leaders, and we want to be sure that we can say that you are protected behind this. Now, we went back and forth with, do we need a 0.5 millimeter lead equivalency like, a standard, or if it's not on your back, why not do a full millimeter? Why not get those numbers in the 99%? It's all physics. So really, as long as you can put a person behind a barrier of 1 millimeter, you should be getting 99+% protection and for the whole room. And so I think that is key to it, but we needed to prove that. And so, one of the highest levels of evidence is randomized controlled trials. And so we have 2 randomized controlled trials, one that was done in Australia and one that was done in Emory. And both of those, again, showed 20 times better than the lead apron, just superiority. And a lot of that is because at the lead apron level, it's even better than behind the lead apron, because, lead apron's only 0.5 millimeter and this is 1 millimeter. But it's also obviously significantly better at the head level, the arm level, the axillary area, where a lot of women are getting radiation to their axilla and it's causing breast issues. So we're basically putting the person and your team behind, the operator and the team behind 1 millimeter lead equivalency, which again, just statistically, that gives you that 99%. Unfortunately, what a lot of people are doing is going to the lighter lead, that it's not as hard on the back, but you're letting more radiation in. So you're sacrificing really your health when you do that. So why not leave it 1 millimeter? So that's what we did. There are multiple now trials out there that are non-randomized. We've got a lot of phantom trials out there, but I think one of the most significant ones, at least for me, was the real world data. And that is, you get these kind of controlled situations in these randomized trials, and can you repeat that, in the real world? And so what we did is we collected all of our data every time we go to a launch, because we have to have buy-in from the physicians, from the staff, from the hospital, from the radiation safety officers, that it's doing what we're saying it's going to do, that it's going to block 99% or better. And so, we put on real-time dosimetry on them. We measure that. We've done that from the beginning of the company and starting the company. And so we have thousands of cases. And so we publish that. Eric Strzemski's published that, and basically 1,700 cases. But I think more importantly, it's from over 600 labs across the world, because it's an international study. It's multiple different types of procedures, from EP to structural to peripheral, CTOs, complex PCI. All of those were in there. And, it showed basically the same thing. The numbers were the same. And so it basically shows that we can take that very controlled setting and we can also put it into real world. And this is what you ought to get. And this is what we expect when we take it and when we launch it. We know that we're going to get those numbers, because it's just basically, putting it in front of you. Now, I will say there's a learning curve, because we're not used to, as operators, being responsible for our team's radiation protection. And so I do think it's important that setup, has to be right. And there's a learning curve, and we know that, and we have to make sure that that's done every single time in order to get these numbers. But that's where we have a really strong clinical team. Naively, I thought we could throw it in there and, just they could take it out of the box and go with it. It's not that way. You have to have strong clinical teams that show them how to do it. And then once you see how it's done, and once you know your numbers, then you know what the setup should look like every single time. And if it doesn't look like that, you immediately know. So it's not like you have to think about it every time. I used mine for 3 years. They got me one, and I continued to practice for 3 more years full time. So I used it for all of my cases. And so when it's not set up, right, if there's a gap, or it's not close enough to the table, or whatever for the defender. I think a lot of that is being simplified now that we're coming from the ceiling with the Guardian. And so I think that's a little bit more intuitive, because it's more like a head shield on steroids, but it's 1 millimeter lead equivalency.
And can you easily say now that you are definitely superior to traditional systems from a radiation safety standpoint? Okay.
Every single every single study that is out there show that we're superior. And it's just
Excellent.
because of the amount of attenuation that this is able to get with the 1 millimeter lead equivalency, and the areas that the lead aprons don't cover. I mean, that you're getting almost zero coverage of your head and your arms and your hands and your arm, every other part of your body. And so, those are covered behind this. So when you look at total body protection, which is what I think is the standard, then it's total body protection, because every, organ system has a different sensitivity to radiation. So, even though the head may be able to accept a little bit more radiation, if you will, than some of the reproductive organs or breast tissue or something like that, you need to factor that in. Don't ignore the head. I mean, you probably have friends like I do who have died of brain cancer, left-sided brain cancer, and it's a terrible, terrible way to die. And, we've got to protect that. I think the head and obviously the eyes are very important, and that's going to take a physician and his team out just as quickly as anything else. And so I do think it's important to cover the whole body. So we've got to cover the whole body, and we've got to cover the whole team. And our level of protection is not just reduction. It is because we were founded on getting people out of lead aprons and shedding the lead is kind of our trademark. Then we want to have ways that at all levels around the room, we're reducing radiation to the level that you could get out of a lead apron.
And for the people who have not used it yet, I'm sure there's a real-time radiation measurement that allows us to see that, there's a leak somewhere. On that case, we got a little bit more radiation. Can you elaborate on how that works?
Yeah, I think it's very important to have that. I think what we're going to see is real-time dosimetry becoming at least standard of care for the initiation, if not long-term. The companies are doing much better as far as the way that they're doing their real-time radiation protection, where now you can, get it on your phone after every case. But I think that is vital, because if it brings radiation to me, it makes it visible. And so, the issue that we had, Hady, is that people's never seen that radiation before, as you know. And so, now we're showing them a number and they're like, oh, I didn't know I was getting any. And you're like, well, no, you were getting some. This is a very, very, very low number. This is basically background radiation. So, but there is going to be a number on there most of the time. And even if it reads 0, don't think you're not getting radiation. It's below the sensitivity of the device. But we're getting radiation all the time. And our body's able to heal from that. I mean, we're getting it from the sun, and we're getting it from, the earth, and we're getting it from bananas and nuts and things like that. So we're always exposed to radiation, but low levels radiation, at those levels your body can heal from. Our problem is that we're getting in front of a sun every day, day after day, and our body's not having the time to heal. And as you know, there's several studies out there now, actually 2 of them, showing the damages to your DNA, and then your body recovers, and damages DNA and your body recovers. And so we know that's happening, but what we don't know is how sensitive are you to radiation? And so, there are people that have different levels of sensitivity. And so for us at Rampart, we want to get you as close to 0 as possible, because we don't know your sensitivity. And so, I think that that's really important for me. If it's my child or, my family member behind there, then I want to be able to say, hey, it's fine. You can go in there without a lead apron, and you're going to have the lowest radiation numbers that we could possibly get right now. And it's going to be on average 20 times better than what you'd get with standard protection that we've had for the last 100 years.
And like you said, part of the success that you have had in spreading around the world and around the country is the fact that it doesn't affect throughput. So that means ease of use from a staff standpoint. Can you tell us how many seconds or minutes it takes to prep the system, and comparing to the traditional lead system?
Sure. So, typically now everyone just puts, you typically put a bag over the head shield, and then everybody puts their lead on. So that really doesn't take that long. If you now with the Defender, which is, the initial model that we have, we still have those. Those take on average, when you start out, they take about 2 minutes. It's 3 bags that you put on. You put one on one shield, one on the other shield, and one in the middle, and that's it. Takes about 2 minutes. My team was, less than a minute. I was doing all my STEMIs, even with that back then. Now with the Guardian is basically a big head shield. It's putting a bag on. So it's just a band bag. So that band bag goes on. Literally, we had our engineers who had never seen it before take it out of the bag and get it on in less than 30 seconds. And so if anybody who has been in the lab and put on band bags and put them on the head of the II and everything else, you can do this in 20 seconds. And so there's really not a workflow issue anymore. And you can't say that for even some of the other competitors. I do think that that's one of the things that very early on, when we told the engineer who was designing this, what are the halves that you have to have. One of them is it can impact workflow. I mean, you got to make it so that it doesn't take 15 minutes to drape. Second is because with a mobile system, it has to be easy to move. So it's got to have great casters to be able to move it in and out. And third, it has to give you access to as many sites as possible. You got to get the wrist. You got to get the groin. If you can get pedal, if you can get, abdomen, if you can get IJ, if you can get all the other ones, great. But we at least have to get those in order to make an impact, because the majority of the cases in the world, you have to have those. And so I think he did a really good job, but there was room for improvement. And I think on all of those, we've improved. Now we can get, with Guardian, we get access to doing peripherals going up and over. We get access to device implants. We can do IJs now. We can certainly do, radial, pedal, all of those. And the draping is less than 20, 30 seconds. And I think the other thing is you don't want to take up much room in your lab. Some of these labs are extremely small. And so the Defender took up a lot of room. So this next gen, if you will, of radiation protection really even improved on all of those things, because those are the things that we knew were going to be an issue up front. I think we solved them to the best we could with a mobile model, and then moved on to next gen, which is what's in demand now.
I mean, using it in STEMI cases tells me all I need to know about how efficient and fast that is. This is impressive. And additionally, you have buy-in from the staff that now their health is being prioritized and they're investing in something. And those additional 10 seconds that they have to spend putting that on, now they're avoiding herniated disc in their neck, etc. So STEMI cases, have you seen this as applied in real world so far, or has it been in selected centers?
Yeah. So I would say it really depends on the comfort level of the operator and the staff. I would say in most places they are evolving toward STEMIs. Now, we initially say until you really get used to it and understand it and can drape it quickly, then don't do your STEMIs. One thing we don't want to do is we don't want to delay the door to balloon time. So I think that's really, really important. Luckily, and actually we had already planned on doing a trial that actually shows that, but the trial was just done and published in SCAI a couple of weeks ago. So Jim Hermiller's lab just published that, and so they did 147 cases that they looked at, STEMI cases that were with traditional lead aprons and head shields versus Rampart, and the numbers were identical. They were exactly 30 minutes. So in fact, it was 31 minutes for traditional and 30 minutes for the Rampart. So now I think we've got really strong data that shows that, when you're comfortable doing it, it can certainly be done. And my team was able to do it quickly. And I think as we move forward, I don't think that STEMIs are going to be excluded for any really emergencies, are going to be excluded from a protective case.
So you talked about the effectiveness of the system from a radiation protection standpoint. How about orthopedic injuries? Do we have any data so far, prospective data, on the fact that doctors are becoming healthier, back pain is becoming less frequent? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so one thing we don't have, because I do think that's going to take some time, is the actual injury level. Now, we have done studies where we looked at fatigue and pain, and looked at those on a weekly basis and a daily basis. And it was statistically, really remarkably statistically significant that you had less pain and less fatigue. And I think those are really signals to the body that it's a problem, and that is going to lead to injury. Now, that's going to take obviously a little bit more time to sort out. And we're really trying to understand this. So we're supporting a trial at Harvard by Ajar Kocher, and it's an ergonomics trial. And what he's looking at is specifically ergonomic strain, torsion, flexion of the spine while we're in the lab. Because I do think that part of it is the weight. There's no doubt about it. If you get the weight off, we know that you add 14 pounds of pressure to your shoulders, it's going to increase your interdiscal pressures by 300 pounds. So we know, that you're going to get the weight is an issue. But secondly, we're standing in very odd positions. We've got one foot on the pedal, we're twisting and turning, we got our arms out in front of us. So we're trying to really understand that better. Right now, I don't think we have a great grasp on that. But could we do something within our labs to make them ergonomically better for us, whether we have lead on or not, that would reduce injury patterns? I think we're still working on that, and I think we're a little bit early on it.
So you mentioned obviously non-cardiac procedures. So let's kind of be more specific. Let's say you have a left superficial femoral artery case. You're going up and over from the right groin, and you may access the foot. Is the setup completely different? Is that a learning curve? Tell us how your system can be used in these cases.
Absolutely. Well, we have, two main systems. We have the Defender. And the Defender, I was actually able to do all of my cases, even the up and over cases, with the Defender. The issue with that is you have to change your workflow. I had to use longer catheters because in order to image down, below the knee, you had to push the patient pretty far north and up underneath the shield. So I had to use longer sheaths. So the shield was back where I could have access to it. So that was a big issue with that because all of the panels are on a mast that's sitting right beside you, and it's a single panel that goes across. So I think that's why we really felt like in order to get into some of these other subspecialties and get buy-in where it doesn't affect workflow, then we developed the Guardian. The Guardian is basically a large head shield, but the beauty of this one is the side panels can move in. So you have one big shield in the middle, you have side panels that move in, and you have soft shielding below that goes down to the patient. So the nice thing about that is you can isolate, it goes all the way over the table, and you can isolate a leg. So I can be standing on the right side of the table, isolate that leg where the panel goes all the way down the right leg, curves around across the ankle, if you will, and then you have all of that area that you can image all the way up and down the table. For pedal cases, it's obviously pretty easy because you just put it across the ankle and you can go up. So, and then you stand on the other side of the table and do it the opposite way to do left or right. So I think that subspecialty now, we are, and we'll get to it, I'm sure, later about what data we have coming out in the future. But as part of our Secure series, we have a multi-center randomized peripheral trial that will be starting in the next month or so. And really looking forward to that trial getting going. We have real world data, which shows very low radiation exposure. In fact, it was one of the lowest radiation exposures of all the subspecialties. But I want to do it in a trial. I want to really define exactly what setup. I know how I used it. I know how I think you can use it. But I want somebody doing that over and over and over again to say, this is a setup for up and over right to left. This is a setup for up and over left to right. This is a setup for antegrade. This is a setup for, whatever, AAAs. So I do think that's something that we're continuing to build because we want data to support it. We're also getting into neuro. Talk about other subspecialties. Neuro is another one because they're using biplane, lots of exposure there. And so we've already done some preliminary trials on that with Dr. Alex Kuhn in Tucson. And they just presented that at their recent neuro meeting, SVIN. So we've got that, and we'll be starting a trial with them. We've also got a vascular surgery. Dr. Pat Muck is leading those trials of vascular surgery and AAAs. And he's gotten some phenomenal data in his lab in Ohio behind a Guardian and being able to protect both sides because of those movable angle shields on the side. So then we get in, there's a couple other subspecialties, probably the most difficult one I think is going to be orthopedics, just because they're working right up underneath, a lot of times working right up underneath the camera. And so it just makes it a little bit more challenging to get up underneath there and see what you're doing well enough with a barrier in front of you. So a little challenge there, but we'll get there.
Right. And obviously, radial has become standard of care in interventional cardiology, PCI. And obviously, one of the small kind of weaknesses of radial is that it has a little bit more radiation associated with it, especially with long, complex PCI. Have you been able to eliminate that difference between femoral and radial? Are both of them close to zero?
We have not seen any difference between those two. We'd probably need a larger series to see, only because I think most of our trials that we've done are predominantly radial, and most people are going radial now. But what we have seen, we have not seen any difference between it, and the reason is because just the way the setup is, you're putting the shield just above the groin or just above the radial access site, and so there's really no difference in setup. So I wouldn't anticipate any difference, and we haven't seen any so far. But if you're going to pick up a difference, I think you'd have to do a lot of patients, because I don't think the difference is there.
So that's very encouraging. Now you're allowing for the safest technique without the major side effects. So in terms of patient safety, the scatter back to the patient, tell us more about that. On the physician side, we don't understand that too well. Does this give the patient more radiation, especially in long CTO procedures?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I do think there is a misconception there. We have a lot of people think that it will bounce off the shield, and actually doesn't. It's absorbed by the shield. And so, but what you have to be careful of is there is soft shielding up underneath it. And if that soft shielding gets into your II, where you're imaging, then it's going to bump up the KEV and the patient will get more. So as long as it's set up right and the soft shielding is pointed towards you on the bottom, then it doesn't affect the patient radiation dose.
Excellent. And now, obviously, the elephant in the room, the cost. And this is the major, all the physicians want it, but administrators are very hard to convince from that perspective. What is the best way for physicians to approach administrations from a business standpoint and showing a return on investment?
Yeah, we're working on that in a bunch of different fronts. I would say the first one would be with our society, and really getting the backing of our society behind us, really to demand this as a subspecialty. So we've got SCAI. The SCAI multi-society position paper will be coming out in the next month or so, and that's going to be signed on by the ACC, by SVS, by SIR, all of those, and it's going to demand that we are demanding as a subspecialty in cardiology, vascular surgery, neuro, that we get the best radiation protection in our rooms. And so I think that will hopefully help push it. I think that's one thing. The second thing is we're partnering with them to do a economic impact paper. And so there's an ALARA Plus committee that we're working on to do an economic impact paper. We did one ORSIF, which I'm president of, which is a radiation, and really raises awareness for radiation protection, ORSIF, and I would encourage all of your viewers to join that. It's free, but it also shows you kind of what's out there. What are the technologies? What's going on in this world of radiation and orthopedic safety? But we're joining with ORSIF, wrote the initial economic impact paper, and we're joining with SCAI to update that. So I think that's going to be some ammunition for hospitals, and ammunition for you to take to your hospital on the ROI, because that's a very difficult thing. We know that even from the SCAI paper that patients are reducing their case, that physicians are reducing their caseload, that they're not working as long, that recruitment is getting more difficult. Cardiology didn't even fill all of its slots. Fewer people going into this, and we know why. They're not going into it because they're worried about the risks. And paper just came out with from EP that showed the same thing, that's why, particularly women aren't going into EP or going into our field. There's only 4% going into our field. So, we're missing a lot of great talent there that we need to recruit and retain. And so I think that's one way that I think you can get hospitals to lean in on this, because number one, change is coming. And number two, you want to be ahead of it rather than it happening on the backside. We're also working, and the last thing I think is we're working at both the state and the federal level to make changes. A bill was just submitted in Arizona last week basically demanding that number one, that you don't have to have a variance to come out of your lead aprons if you're using some of these proven technologies. And number two, they're actually getting fund supporting for their rural hospitals, and they're actually getting, demanding that the hospitals, at least half their cath labs, have advanced radiation protection. So I think we're seeing some movement there, and in Illinois and in California. And then we're also proposing a bill that's called the Image Safely 360 bill at the federal level, and kind of pushing that this year. Basically, that not only lowers the standard from the 5,000 millirem down to 2,000 millirem, but we're also saying that we have to advance radiation protection, improve oversight, which we've had very poor oversight of radiation protection in our labs, and make sure every lab is equipped with the equipment they need to protect the operators and the staff. And, we've been patient focused and for so many years, and I think rightly so. We've taken care of patients and saved a lot of lives, but we shouldn't have to pay the price for it. And what I'd like to see over the next, 10, 15 years is that we're changing every cath lab so that this next generation doesn't go through the same thing that I went through and Hermiller went through and Kariakis went through, and some of these people that, all you have to do is ask your partners and somebody that's had cancer or an orthopedic issue. We now have technology that I believe can reduce that risk. And I think we need to invest in it in the future.
Excellent. And for a group of physicians who is considering that, what documents would you recommend that they get armed with when they go to administration? Can you give us specific examples? You mentioned SCAI, you mentioned the other societies.
Absolutely. And that's been requested multiple times by us, a toolkit. And so one of the things the joint SCAI, ALARA plus committee is doing is putting together a toolkit. It'll be a toolkit for physicians, take to administration, a toolkit that they can take to the radiation safety officer, wherever the kind of obstruction is to enhance this, then they'll have a toolkit to do that. So we're putting that together. ORSIF is going to have a toolkit as well. So we should have that. Really, I think that's planned in the next month or so, that we'll have a toolkit to put in front of them. And hopefully we'll have the economic impact paper too, that'll show them some real data on why this is important and why it's good for not only their employees and their staff, but also good for them, as a hospital.
And now what's happening in the real world of interventional cardiology is obviously the world of ASCs, OBLs for peripheral interventions. And if you go to those centers, I don't personally work there, but you see there are way more radiation exposure. The techniques, the equipment is a little bit less friendly from a radiation exposure standpoint. But of course, the cost is sometimes prohibitive. Have you, if an OBL or ASC is considering that, tell us your experience in getting that to become available and economically feasible.
Yeah. I think that's next, and it will be some challenge just because of those levels. But on the other hand, I also think that this is going to become standard. And when it becomes standard, then it's just something when you think about doing an OBL. And I've worked in the OBL with the Rampart the last couple of years. And in our OBL, I published the data at AMP, which basically showed that 80 to 90% of the time my badge and my first assistant badge read 0. So, we can, in the OBLs, you can really knock it down. The issue until now, I think, Hady, is that most of those procedures were peripheral. We really did not have a great peripheral solution. Now we do with the Guardian. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that moving in. If people are suspending things from booms, this can just be hooked up to your boom. You have to have really good under-table lead. And so, we've developed under-table lead that really is designed to really lower your radiation exposure. And, if your room's like anything like my room was, there were just strands of kind of leftover leaded drapes on ours. But that's really important. And abdominal shielding is really important. So the bunker has a millimeter equivalency at the table level that just snaps on and pops off. And so, that I think is going to, again, add to our protection. Hopefully we can get, the prices of these things down lower. I will say, one of the things with a lot of the radiation protection and with the acrylic is that this acrylic is only made in 2 places in the world. It's made in Japan, and theirs has lead in it, but that's really the only place you can get leaded acrylic. And the only other place you can get it is a non-lead acrylic, which is nice because it really removes lead out of the room. And we really are trying to get, as we move forward and labs are being built, all the lead out of the room, just because it's so hard to, get rid of. And long term, there's even been tests showing how much lead is actually on your apron over time. So we're exposing our bodies to lead as well. But we at Rampart also make bismuth acrylic. And so there's only 2 places in the world that make an attenuating acrylic, is Japan and us. And now we're able to supply that. And hopefully as we're able to supply that, we can, over time, maybe reduce the costs as we start getting, higher and higher volumes. So I think that's one of the things that I think Rampart has done is we're not just a device company. We are a radiation protection company. We want to do everything and lean in to this whole field of radiation protection. And there are competitors out there, but that's okay. With my heart is that, even if there are multiple competitors out there to Rampart, we're protecting people. And that protection is going to, I think, change lives overall, whether from an orthopedic or radiation protection, cancer standpoint. I think we'll be able to do a lot. Now we're learning so much more about how the effects of radiation affects cognitive function and vascular dysfunction, inflammatory dysfunction, certainly reproduction. So it goes way beyond cancer. And so if we can just block it all as much as we possibly can, then that's really our goal.
Excellent. And if cardiologists are trying to get it, but there are some, resistance on the administrative level from a spending standpoint, why not just one mobile system moving around? I'm sure it does have some drawbacks, but is that a good entry point for this to be tested? Are there major issues with throughput when you deal with a mobile system?
Yeah, I would say that the mobile system, we'll always need a mobile system to move room to room. But I think the challenge there is these are not light. Any lead system, and lead acrylic or non-lead attenuating material is heavy. And I think that adds to getting your staff pushing these things to room, and they won't last as long, and it slows your workflow. So there's a lot of reasons that I think even the Defender wasn't as adopted nearly as well. But if it's already in your room and it's just basically a big head shield that protects you, and it's always right there, and you just pop a bag on it, then I think that's where you're really going to get adoption rates that are just part of your procedure. And that's where I think we need to go.
Excellent. And in terms of additional, I'm sure obviously with Rampart, you do have additional shielding, non-disposable shielding, but is every case that an interventionalist doing adding those to be able to accommodate some of the leaks or potential weaknesses of the system, or is it a completely independent system that doesn't require additional shielding?
Yeah, it really depends on the procedure that you're doing. I do think that if you're doing coronary work, if you're doing radial access or you're doing groin access and working at the heart level, then no additional shielding is really needed. What we found, even we're completing a trial right now in EP, is that based on where they stand and lean over, at least many of them lean over the knee level when they're doing an ablation. Wow. And so putting some additional shielding up across the legs of that area really reduced the numbers. But the thing is that even without that additional shielding, your numbers are so low anyway. It does get better, but it's so much lower than what you had with your traditional lead apron that it's still, rather than 10 times better, we can get it down to 20 times better, but it's still so much better and the numbers are so low. So you're talking getting tenths of millirems better when you add those shieldings. So if you want to, get a tenth of a millirem better, then put that, and we encourage that, and we have soft shielding that are disposable and non-disposable that you can put there in those gaps if you want them But even without it, your numbers are so low that it shows it's significantly better than what you're doing right now. And it's not just slightly better. It's 10 and 20 times better.
And is this one of the main advantages that when you compare your system to other competitors, the need for additional shielding is a little bit less required with Rampart, and of course the profile, etc. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the way that this is designed, it gives you that full, head to toe protection where you're going to get any radiation scatter, usually down. Actually, the closer you are to the panels, the better. So when you start moving away from the panels, the scatter can come up through the patient, can come underneath whatever shielding you put there. And so you can get some scatter. But at that point, the person and where they stand are so far away that the numbers are really small. So I think that's the advantage of ours, just the ability to set it up for all these different procedures and give you that head to toe protection. And the same thing for the head of the bed. We have portable shields that again give you head to toe protection, and that's what we're going for. And also not adding any weight to the table. We're not adding any additional weight to the table, which can be an issue that the big irons don't really like when you add weight to their table or adding devices to the II or anything like that. I think that can become a problem with warranties and things like that. So we really try to stay off the table and give you whole body shielding wherever you are.
Excellent. So obviously this was an excellent review. I'd like to conclude now. Do you have a message for the interventional cardiology community with regards to radiation protection, orthopedic injury, and one kind of last words of wisdom from your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say, I think we need to be bold. Some people are asking, well, why hasn't this happened before? And a lot of it's because our voice has been quiet. And now I think it's time for us to demand. We are the most valuable commodity the hospital has. They can't do anything without us. And we need to, we are in one of the most risky subspecialties that's out there. And because we are in that lab so much, but our patients deserve us being in there. Our hospitals need us in there, but they need to protect us so that we can be in there and be safe. And what you don't want to do is just say, oh, I haven't had a problem now. And so, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm young, I'm bulletproof, whatever. It will happen to you, most likely. And it's not really the cancer, it's the orthopedic injury. So the sooner that you can shed the lead in your career, the better, because I'm paying the price now. I can't pick my grandkids up. I can't put them into their car seats. I can't, put them into their cribs. That 20 pounds leaning over, I can't do anymore. And I regret now looking back that I didn't have a louder voice for change. And I think we owe it to this next generation and certainly ourselves now to start demanding it.
On that, I think we can conclude that was a fantastic review. Thank you, Dr. Foster. And we'll be discussing radiation safety also in future episodes, but thanks for coming today.
Great. Thanks, Hady. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining us on BackTable Cardiology.
If you have not already, be sure to follow and subscribe, rate the show 5 stars, and share with a friend.
If you have any questions or comments, direct message us at _BackTableCards
on Instagram, LinkedIn, X, TikTok, Blue Sky, or YouTube.
BackTable is hosted by Hady Lichaa
and Sammy Seifo.
Our production team is led by Kieran Gannon,
Aaron Bowles,
Gabe D'Agrazio,
and Josh Spencer. Design and digital marketing led by Brian Schmitz.
Social media and PR by Donato Cavuto.
Administrative support provided by Judy Dela Cruz.
Music by Aaron Bowles.
Thanks again for tuning in.
We'll see you next time.